Welcome to episode 5 of the Goatless Yoga Podcast. Hi, Shawn. How are you today?
Pretty good, Kelly. How about you?
I'm good. It's really hard to believe that we've already been doing this now over a month.
It is hard to believe that, but we've kind of set some time aside and um, have probably plans on doing a whole lot more with, but something always comes up and we kind of say, let's do that one today. And it's been working out pretty good. So
Yeah.
grateful for everyone who's been commenting and reaching out and giving us more ideas. And that's always cool to see that. And I appreciate it.
Yeah, and folks should always feel welcome to comment, leave your thoughts. Also, if you have any show topics you would like for us to discuss here, do let us know. We're always open to receiving those suggestions. But today we've both been talking about times when it was our practice that created a space for a shift in our perspective. And we've been talking a lot about what a traditional yoga practice was meant to be, but then what it is for us now. And that thread of it being a transformational or a self liberating, a practice of self study. And there was this hashtag back in the early days of Instagram, I guess you could call it that. And I used it quite a lot. And if I'm not mistaken, Yoga Journal even did some feature on it. But it was called Yoga Saved My Life. And I know I used that quite a lot. And I can think of multiple scenarios where yoga quite literally saved my life. But I think even more often than that, uh, it's a practice that does create that safe container for a perspective shift, whatever that might look like, for our lens through which we're viewing the world to be just a little bit different. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and this is a pretty heavy. It's going to wind up being a pretty heavy topic for me. I don't talk about this a lot. I very rarely talk about it actually, and for some reason it's been in my mind lately. In the topic of yoga saved my life, or in that theme, and I'll start with this. Yoga has saved my life in many ways, and I don't know how much I've talked about it on these podcasts, but when I first started yoga, it was because I decided to get a handle on what I was doing and sort of a health journey, and I thought that getting involved in yoga would um, provide some easier exercise and stretching, and from some of the things I read and some of the social media accounts I was watching at the time, and different websites. So that's what I did, and it was back in started in 2016 when I started to take a classes at the gym. I started to read more about it. I started to study it, different philosophies of it, and on another podcast we'll probably get into how it became what it is to me in Western style or modern style yoga. But for this particular topic of yoga saved my life, it saved my life by kind of giving me a discipline that I can go to the gym and go to eventually a yoga studio and start practicing on a regular basis. So at first in 2016, going into 2017, I was mostly a weekender at the gym. I would take a few classes on Saturday and Sunday. And from there was introduced to told about a yoga studio from one of the instructors. Says, listen, you come here all the time. Why don't you join the studio? I think you're ready for it, to take the next step and go more often and experience different styles and breath work and at the gym, it's mostly a sweaty practice where everyone's there to kind of work out and uses the physical practice at the gym. So I went and joined the studio and decided to give it a try, and developed a daily practice. I used to go to every evening class, Monday through Friday, and I went on the weekend classes, which were, I think, Saturday morning and Sunday afternoon, which is important for this story, because where I'm going to go with it. But so I went to that studio for a number of years. So if it was now, we're probably into 2018, going into 2019, and I went pretty much every day. And I decided to sign up for even a teacher training at that time, going into late 2019 into 2020. So I was really practicing a lot. I started to talk to all the different instructors and different students, and they had a pretty good community of people there that were pretty dedicated into it. And they would get about, between 20 and 30 people there on a daily basis. So as I started to get into this now teacher training discussion with the owner, we have, the COVID coming in 2020. And if anyone remembers, one of the first things that were closed were gyms, yoga studios, fitness studios, any place where there was group gathering and there was sweat or bodily fluids that could be exchanged, or sneezing or coughing or anything like that. So there was a whisper at that time during the beginning of 2020 that, oh, we better be careful. And you start to see the hand sanitizer and sometimes the masks that people would even wear, getting into February of that year. And, the teacher training that I had signed up for was, people didn't want to do it because they didn't want to be in a room together. So they paused it. And the owner said, don't worry about it, Shawn. We're still going to do it. Just, we want to make sure we have 6 or 8 people, and we have 4 right now. And I was looking forward to that, and taking that training at that time. So fast forward a little bit and into now March of 2020. I'm skipping over a lot of other details, but that's when things really started to get crazy, and places actually started to shut down, and they started to say, we're not going to do it anymore. And I remember being at this place. It was around St. Patrick's Day, 2020, and I was the only one there with the instructor. And she said to me, "This is the last class. They're shutting down today." It was a Sunday. It was a Sunday core yoga class that, would get about 8 to 12 people on a Sunday morning. Tough class. I really liked it. And she said, "I don't know, what we're going to do, but we're shutting down." And it was the 2 weeks to stop the spread thing that was going around, and masking, and all this stuff was happening. So I left that day and I went, wow, something that saved my life now is being taken away. I don't know what I'm going to do. And at that time, they didn't have a Zoom set up yet or anything, but it was going that way. And soon after, they did start the a Zoom yoga classes. So I had been home from work, and they had us working remotely, and I would give my brother a call once in a while, and he was a engineer for a semiconductor company in New Mexico, and he was a director of engineering out there. And I would ask him, like, what do you think about COVID? And he would say, well, it's a serious problem. I mean, because I said, the gym had closed, the yoga studios are closed down. And he said, no, take it seriously. He goes, it's if you look at the charts, it's people are getting exposed to the stuff, and it could be very serious, and you can die from it. And I went, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, it's something to take seriously and be careful. And I said, okay. And it actually, he got to a point where he had created an award for the company when he made it look like a little virus award that you would wear on your neck. I mean, when you saw a staff member, wearing a mask or washing his hands or, putting something over his face, he would give that award. I said, "You won the COVID award. You did a great job, and thanks for keeping everyone safe." So we took it very seriously. And when I heard that from him, I said, "I better start taking this stuff serious too." So we were both, we both enjoyed the outdoors, and pretty healthy people, and we hiked and camped and did all the outdoor stuff that people do. And he was out there in New Mexico, and I was here in New Jersey. So during that time, now we're getting into the summer, I would speak to him a lot because I was home from work and I wanted to see what he was up to out there. And we were watching this COVID stuff go through the country. And I was still taking my yoga classes because the studio, as I had mentioned earlier, had a pretty good schedule of Zoom classes. So now we're into the summer of that time, and we're still, doing yoga classes every day, but on Zoom. So, now I'm surviving this COVID by just taking these classes. That was my entire, you know, um, connection to the outside world was through the computer, where I would see, whoever decided to share their screen as students and the instructor, and you were able, at least for that hour or so, I was even sometimes taking 2 classes a day, to be able to have some kind of social life outside of being in the four walls of this space right here that I'm in. It was a different color back then. I painted it, but it was my space, my space I created for basically my practice and a little bit of work. And I would move the chair, jump on the mat, and start doing my practice at night or in the morning or whenever I could.
Mhm.
So then, as the summer goes on, it's obviously going to last a while, and we're getting to June and July, and there's no signs of getting back to normalcy and back to the office, and back to work in a corporate place, and the office is closed. We're being fed work as it comes, and we're being paid, and the government's now involved, and we're somehow getting a check, and I don't know, kind of forgotten a lot of stuff um, because it's been such a while now, and we're now into the summer and fall, and nothing's changing. And I'm speaking to my brother when I can, and he was decided to go on some trips because he had more free time with work, and he was going on some camping trips, and he bought a property out in New Mexico, and decided to start cleaning it up, and he was going to put a trailer there and finally build a house. And so it was exciting. It was an exciting time for him, and I like to keep up on him and keep up with him. And since we were home from COVID, I had a little more time to kind of chat with him through a FaceTime or something. So um, with that, we're now into the holidays, and we get into Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I had spoken to him on Christmas, and it was about maybe December 26th, 27th. I think it was right after Christmas, and he was out camping and whatever. And I remember seeing him, and he was um, in a flannel shirt sitting on a bench, and he was at a campsite, and we had this discussed amongst other things COVID, and we made plans to hike a part of the Colorado Trail in the next June, which would have been June in 2021, for a week. We planned on either hiking to Silverton or starting in Durango, and it was we talked about a few things, and we were going to get dropped off and picked up. We kind of had a nice discussion around Christmas, and I said Merry Christmas, and went on about my business, and had was excited about that plan to do that hike, as we both enjoyed that, and we were going to do an overnight trip and really primitive stuff, and kind of two guys going out there and surviving in the wilderness, but it was pretty cool, and um, I was excited about it. And about a week later, get a call that he had COVID, and he was in the hospital. So during that time, there was a lot of people in the hospital, and you really, if it was a year before that, I probably would have called him and said, "Hey, what's going on?" But I heard that he was he came down. He was pretty sick. He got taken to the hospital via ambulance, and he had walked his dog and came back and go, "I got to go to the hospital. I don't feel right." And they took the hospital. So I sent him a message, and I said, um, his name was Eric, and I said, Eric, I know you can't talk, but feel better, and I'll be in touch. And he responded with a thumbs up, and I said, okay, that's fine. And so that was probably in December, beginning of January, like right around New Year, that he was in hospital, and he got worse, um, and it didn't look good. And he was on a respirator, and he was, we told he was, a scientist out there, and he was a pretty important person doing pretty important work. Some of it with NASA, some of it with the Mars helicopter. I know that everyone's been watching that. So he was a guy that was well liked, well respected, and they've tried their best to make him comfortable. And on January 16th, he passed away, and we lost him. And if it was a normal circumstance, I would have jumped on a plane and went out to New Mexico and took care of everything. But remember, it's now COVID, and none of that stuff could happen, not even funerals, no gatherings whatsoever. If there was a funeral, it would be outside, and was no service. Or so we put together a service on Zoom, actually, where actually a couple thousand people showed up for it, and we had to purchase extra bandwidth or whatever the way it was to give him and people from his job and family members, they stayed on this thing for over 24 hours talking, telling stories, and we have it recorded somewhere. I don't have the guts to watch it, but so, and even it was probably the toughest thing I've had to deal with in my life. But with that said, the one thing I had to do was, I felt like I needed was to take a yoga class. And this is what this episode is about, is kind of, I thought yoga was saving my life in a physical way with keeping me away from those bad habits that I had before, by the disciplined practice I had by going every day. But now it is kind of morphed into, holy shit, I just lost my brother who was 41 years old, unexpectedly, through this virus that came out of nowhere. And I remember, right away, I don't think I missed one class. I right away, signed up for the class and told them about it. And they couldn't hug me. They couldn't, all they can say was, I'm sorry. And I had to, that was all I had. I didn't have any other human connection because we kind of weren't allowed to. So I remember in Shavasana, just laying there, staring at the ceiling, looking up, going, wow, I didn't realize that, or I was surprised to see how now yoga is saving my life another time in a different way, when I thought it was going to be taken away from me because of the situation of COVID and everything else. And now it's like all I have. All I have is to look at this screen, go through this practice guided by an instructor who knows whatever I tell him, and can kind of feel it and then just be. And during those last 5 minutes or 10 minutes of these classes that I was taking, because it wasn't just one of them, it was all of the classes I took until I eventually made it out there in April, and he passed away in January. That kind of saved me from losing it. I didn't return to bad habits. I didn't mess up. I didn't lose my shit. I kept it together. And the only reason why I kept it together was because I had a disciplined practice of yoga on Zoom during the worst time of my life. Something to look forward to each day, even if it was just that hour. So, the theme of this cast is how yoga saved my life. And that's at least 2 or 3 examples of how it saved my life in a very short period of time. And, I'll end my portion of this by just saying that I continue to do yoga to this day. I eventually did take the teacher training and became a certified 200-hour. And I did hike the Colorado Trail on those dates by myself. And I believe I did that and was able to accomplish that because of the practice and because I learned how to be with myself on those moments. I didn't reach for drugs or a bottle or alcohol but I went into myself for that healing, for the healing that I thought I was doing from old scars. And now I had a new one ripped wide open, and I kind of stopped the bleeding faster, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've been kind of going for a little while now, so I don't know if, it's kind of making sense. I can talk about it for a long time because I know how important that practice was to me and my well-being, and still to this day, that I'm able to kind of vividly see that healing, how every one foot in front of the other was kind of progress, and I never really went backwards with dealing with something so horrible.
No. Well,
Sorry.
I want to thank you for sharing the story. And I'm grateful that this space contains it. Those stories, even though hard, I think are sacred stories that when we do give them space are ones that let each other know that we're not alone in this human experience. And so I am grateful for you sharing that story and that example of the way that a practice can sustain us through a myriad of different experiences. So thank you.
Well, thank you for listening. And, one thing I do hope is that whoever does listen to that, there's always, hopefully they'll get something out of it and realize that it's not the end. And, it's, there's always someone who would want to hear your story and be there for you. And even if it's behind the screen.
Yeah.
Because at that time they couldn't do anything else besides that, because I couldn't do anything else besides that either, for family members. We took an enormous effort to try to get anything done, and very difficult to do.
Yeah.
But the yoga practice played a major part of healing for me, major, including, I was getting a little emotional, so I'll come out of it, with explaining something else about how I did practice yoga on the trail. I did sleep in a tent for 2 nights, but did some yoga. It was fun. People asked about what I was doing. They were curious, and they also cared about my story, because it's not. I went with a guide actually to the trail, kind of just after I decided that I was going to heal that way, with saying I'm going to do this for my brother Eric, and I'm going to not. This was something I had planned. I'm going to do it anyway. And kind of developed a whole other type of thing where I'm going to do what I want, kind of life, instead of not doing what I want. So I wanted to do it, and I went and I did it, and I contacted a guide, and there was other people on the trip. I joined for a portion of it. Some of these people do this for the whole summer. I didn't have that time, but I joined for a portion of it in southern Colorado. I think it was Marshall Pass or around that area, if I remember correctly, and that can also be taken as a yoga practice. The hiking and the backpacking. It was like a overnighting it. I mean, it was pretty primitive, and those people were going through some stuff too. It's not people don't just go out and want to hike 20 miles a day. You know, even though it is beautiful and it's a lot of fun, I think there's always something else in there. And when we got back to the campsite and the mess hall, they set up a little big tent. Pretty impressive actually. They had to take it down each day and drive it to the next um, sleeping area, um, where they would ask like, what's up with you, what's going on. And at that time I was ready to start talking about it, not like I am now, but and I would explain why I was doing it, like walking, hiking, and to heal. I wasn't just even though you could have, and even though I do have pictures of the beautiful flowers along the trail, and the sky and the mountains, and water features and all that, I was kind of just doing it to complete it, because well, one of the examples I'll give you, why not, I might as well say it. The couple days I was there, I was always the first one back. It was like, you could probably take anywhere from probably 5 to 8 hours to complete this. I was, beelining it, just saying, I just, because it just meant so much to complete what I started. So, but I still enjoyed it, and I'm really hopeful that this conversation could start more conversations and help someone, because it could be devastating, to have something like that. And so, thank you for listening. I don't want to go on anymore. Maybe another time, but um, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening to me, though. Appreciate it.
Well, again, thank you for sharing. May I ask one question?
Of
That's
course.
So, since we are, and you mentioned how yoga kept you from losing it during that time, I think I would like our listeners to hear from you what it was about the practice that did that for you. What was it about? And you're doing asana and breath work, and obviously shavasana, maybe some meditation. What about that allowed you to sustain yourself during that time?
Well, the first part of it would be that it gave me something to look forward to. As I went on my health journey, I changed my diet. And as you can imagine, something like this could really throw that off. I mean, but I did not allow it to throw me off, because I would look forward to practice and to continuing on progressing in my practice. But I think as a whole, there's nothing specifically that actually jumps out at me when you ask that question. But as a whole, it did. I knew I was going to be doing the warm up or the meditation at the beginning, or listening to someone's Dharma talk, and it all started to really resonate at that time. It wasn't just words; it was actually had meaning.
Yeah.
And as it went from years behind the screen, eventually. And I paid attention to every single bit of it and heard every word. And yeah, the breath work was there. And yeah, when someone said an intention, and it actually happens, when people start to find out. And this particular class, this particular instructor had said something that really, really resonated with me. It was almost like they were speaking to me. And
Mhm.
I think we've all had that. I've
Yeah.
had it many times, but this one in particular was like, wow. And when the class was over, people leave the class, and you have to kind of lean up to it and shut it off and press leave the room. And when I leaned up to it, and she said to me, Shawn, and I said, yeah. And she says, that was for you. I says, I know.
Mhm.
So it was like, it was the whole hour was really focused, laser focused on the healing aspect of it. I couldn't even begin to tell you how or why, but every foundational posture, every child's pose, um, you know, was part of it.
Yeah.
It was like a puzzle of healing, because I was blown wide open and little by little put back together pretty quickly, though, in which I'm grateful for that. And that's why I'm sharing it, because it could have went the other way. It could have easily went the other way. It could have easily not been talking like this today. Could have easily forgotten about the practice because you've given up on it. Says, the hell with it. But something kept me going back to it, and something that, like I said earlier, I thought I was going to lose it because of the COVID, and I actually wanted it even more because of what happened during the time of the lockdown and losing my brother and all of that stuff. So,
Mhm.
I mean, if I can help one person with that story, it'd be worth it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's how I think about most everything like that. It's a lot of people avoid sharing what they may term as heavy, and not everyone is able to hear or hold space for it. But I think that those stories are very, very meaningful to hear because, again, it shows our collective human experience that these are things that we all come up against, and to acknowledge that and to hold space for one another and sharing that with each other, I think is a really important thing. So yeah,
Well,
if one person feels less alone or less
well,
like they're dealing with something in an odd way because of hearing you,
well.
it's worth it.
It's some of the things that we're working on, like the We Collective, collectively doing it. Collectively going towards something, going towards it. And when you just said that, what comes to mind is we've said it before. I think we said it in one of these podcasts, is that no one shows up in a yoga studio because
Hmm.
you know they always show up there curious about most likely themselves, and most people. I want to say all, but I'll say most, just so for argument's sake. Most people don't just wander in there one day for
Yeah.
they're nothing better to do.
Hmm.
So when this story that I'm telling now, I didn't just wander into a studio, right? Now I'm there in the studio and I'm going through something else. So that is even more powerful now that I think about it, because I didn't, have to get away from the practice and then say, oh shit, I better go back in there. That helped me the last time I was in there. So maybe now that I'm thinking about it here in this video, it was probably more important than I thought when I first started telling the story. That thank God that I was in there, and around those types of people, because I don't know what would have happened.
Yeah, you may have
You
not
know?
had the bandwidth to find it in that time,
Yeah, I
but it
might
was
have
something
really,
you already had,
yeah,
which,
already had and already craved, and I kind of, not, now that I'm talking about it more, it's like I must have known that was going to do it. I must have said that's the only thing I'm going to be able to do. I could have went to church. I could have did a lot of things. Well, actually, I probably couldn't have went to church during. I don't think we're allowed to go to church either. But I could have done a lot of different. I could have prayed. I could have, but I didn't. I went to the practice,
yeah.
which is, we talk many times, not just a physical thing. It's not just an exercise. It's a complete package of what happens during that hour or leading up to that hour. That is really the practice.
Mhm.
So now that I'm talking about it, maybe I knew that. Maybe I knew that would help me, because they've helped me before.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. No, I think it really is interesting and a beautiful thing how sometimes we end up taking care of ourselves unconsciously
Yeah.
um in those ways. So, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate you taking the time and trusting the conversation.
Yeah, well, it's time. It's been a while, so I've been wanting to. It's time that it's recorded, and I'm sure we'll touch on it again at some point when different topics come up. But
Hmm.
you know, um, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, well, during the pandemic, I was asked to write a book. Someone who was a small publisher had contacted me because he followed me on Instagram and would read, because being a writer, I started my Instagram to basically be like a journal for my yoga practice, which I film every day, regardless of whether I'm posting anything or not, so that I can go back and kind of be my own teacher that way and check on what I'm doing. And I would post a little snippet, but then I would write about what the practice was bringing up for me that day. Thoughts, things I was dealing with, all of those things. And he had read those posts and he said, "What if you turned that into a book and tell us how you use the practice to work on yourself?" So during the pandemic, uh, 2020, most of 2020, I wrote a book. And it's called Sacred Catharsis. And in that book, I outline how I use the practice through the scaffolding of the chakra system and other ways too, like elemental, alchemical ways to do the inner work, to do the self study, the svadhyaya. And in that book, I also talk about how this practice has quite literally saved my life multiple times. And it continues to do so in very subtle ways and very huge ways too. And, lately I've not been posting. It probably in the last 6 months or so. I've slowed down and I've not posted anything on Instagram in over 6 weeks now. Not a thing. And that's an interesting space for me to be in, as I'm not really sharing my inner thoughts as often. But yoga and my practice, especially in the last month or so, has looked drastically different than it has since the pandemic. It's changing in big ways. And it has also created, and like I mentioned to you, it created a space for me to be able to have shifts in perspective. Like you can change the lens on a camera. It has given me the capacity to change my lens. And it's like peeling off layers of an onion. The healing that comes with it. And I'm kind of being obscure, I guess, but lately it's peeled off layers that I really didn't even know needed to come off so that I could get where I'm going. And where I'm going is very unknown to me. Like I've had dreams from the time that I was a child that certain things were going to come about. And because of my circumstances, I think I had a vision of how they would come about. And now I'm realizing it's not going to be that way, but something totally new, totally unimagined. And there was a time, even just a year or two ago, that I would not have been ready to receive it because I wasn't quite in the space to where I could change my lens. But as I practice and as I begin to meet life as a practice, because life is practice, the whole point, you hear countless yoga teachers say, oh, now let's take your practice off the mat and into the world. It's little cliche things, but that's serious. Your navigation of the world can also be your yoga practice. And as I've been doing that, it's unveiling myself to me, like that authentic, true, real self that was masked over by a lot of identities that I thought I had to carry. Like I had this backpack of them. And it was so principled, very principled, and in some ways proud. Like it was like a honor type thing. And those types of things are very hard to set down, and I'm still navigating what that means. And it's like my brain has completely changed in the last 6 weeks to where even familiar stories, I'm seeing them completely different. And this is a little bit of a different story from yours. I have similar stories as yours on how yoga saved my life, and I wrote about them in the book. This one's present, this one's current. And I think this time it's saving my life in a way that it's giving me it.
Wow.
It's putting it in my hands. It's showing me what I'm worth and who I am outside of these identities. And we have to have our ego, and ego likes identities. That's how ego helps us stay safe in the world. So yeah, even in that, there's identity. But there were identities that were making my box very, very, very small and tight fitting and lonely for me. Very lonely and isolating. But I'll say it's I came to New Jersey, and it was a place that I never thought I would see. And for those who don't know me, I live in the rural Appalachian Mountains of southeastern Kentucky. You don't come here unless you don't just stumble upon this place. You don't come here unless you have a reason to. And my family's been here for generations and generations. And that's how we get here. And so I'm from this place, I don't have cell service in the place where I'm sitting currently. That's how remote it is. And through circumstances, I didn't think that travel like that was something that I was going to experience. I never wrote it off, but I just, for whatever reason, never expected it. And then there I was, right, for our workshop. And I was standing on the beach in New Jersey. And I could see New York when I looked one way, the city. And I could see the open ocean the other way. And it was like no picture I've ever seen of New Jersey. It was like no magazine, no video, no commentary could have prepared me for that moment standing on that beach. Like the cleanest beach I've ever seen. For real. And in that moment, I realized, I always say it too, it's so funny, that our reality is made up of stories that we tell ourselves. It's just the way that we make sense of what we're experiencing in a sensory way, right? So our brain makes up this story. This is what this is. This is what is real. And I stood there and I realized that what I thought was true about myself and what could happen for me was vastly bigger than I could have imagined by holding those certain identities so, so, so close. Those certain stories so close that it did not allow room for anything else. To to be truly seen, like, it can be really hard to show up in a vulnerable way, to be wide open. I'm a person who likes to protect myself. And it may seem like I'm being vulnerable a lot because I'll talk about, these heavy topics, these weighty topics, like I'm talking about the weather. And it really is. I can talk about a lot of things without getting emotional. But when it comes to like being vulnerable in that way, it splits me open. Because it's like one of those moments where I feel like it's Charles Bukowski, and I've been meaning to look up this quote where he talks about love. Like, if you go for love, be ready to die, because that's the risk. And it's like that moment. Like what I thought is dying.
Hmm.
And who am I emerging? And then opening myself up to things, like that. You risk, if not a physical death, an ego death, an identity death. And when you come from a place prior that was very lonely, isolated, alone, like right now sitting here talking about it, I feel like I've got sea legs or something. Like my
Yeah.
knees are weak and I'm sitting down.
Well, I mean, it's like, we always live, or at least we used to, and we kind of live by, through things that we already knew,
Mhm.
and then when you have that moment on the beach, or have that moment when I'm on my back looking up, and or in an unfamiliar circumstance, when you're wide open and vulnerable, is when you realize, or you should realize, or what it means to me. I'll say that it tells me that I'm allowed to live this life
Mhm.
through this lens of I'll use the word in present moment time, not through the past, you know like living through the things that we already knew through our parents, or other people in our community that tell us this is how it goes. When you live, when you don't know when it's going, and when it's exciting,
Mhm.
and it's freeing,
It is.
to the point where it's mind-blowing, when you're no longer in that rut, no matter how big or small,
Mhm.
and you come out of it, and it's like, what's going on? And I think that's what you're explaining. And you're saying that you don't care if you're vulnerable anymore, that you're still gonna seek it out, right? Am I hearing that right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to describe.
Very hard to describe.
Uh, I in taking in saying yes to taking the risk of this identity death, of broken heart, of all of these things, and saying yes, I'm going to take that risk. Somehow, I guess it's kind of like the people who seek out adrenaline rushes because they say it makes them feel alive,
Yeah.
right? In saying yes, I'm going to risk this. I'm going to risk people thinking that they knew me, but they don't anymore. I'm going to risk possibly a broken heart. I'm going to risk complete unknown. I'm going to risk all these things. I'm saying yes. There's something about that, like you said, that's freeing and feels totally alive.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's very, very vulnerable. So it causes me, like I wrote about in the book, how I dealt with old patterns of like response, the way that I respond in heightened emotion. And we learn these things. Our brain, like patterns our behavior based upon what worked in the past as it anticipates what's about to happen. So sometimes we'll behave in really strange ways to other people when if they knew where it was coming from, or even if we knew where it was coming from, it would make more sense
Yeah.
because those old patterns don't work in this new situation, but we use
Right.
them anyway.
Yeah, but that's what I meant about, we are always thinking about things we already know,
Yeah,
and when
yeah,
when you have to throw that out, it is vulnerable. It's like, I don't know how to react to this one now. Like, but it is a freeing thing. So you're always going to do it, because you're like, well, I've made it this far,
yeah.
and it feels good. So yeah, yeah, that's cool.
It is a freeing thing, but also the reason I brought that up was even those patterns that I wrote about in the book. This is how yoga, the yoga practice, and it is the stuff that I do on the mat that prepares me to be able to stand on that beach and not just fall into the sand and cry and be like, somebody take me to the crazy house.
Yeah.
Because it makes me durable, right? It shows me to myself. And then these situations are also showing me these patterns that are cultural at this point, very deeply ingrained cultural patterns of behavior that not only I have, but my culture at large has. And then also old patterns that I've had from the time I was a little child.
Yeah.
That I wasn't aware of when I wrote the book, or that I didn't see in the same way when I wrote the book, that I didn't quite understand like this. It's bringing those up and waving them in my face. And so there's moments where, I'll be completely honest. I don't want to be lonely. Nobody does. I don't want rejection or abandonment. And so those things, rejection and abandonment, are probably two of my biggest things that'll provoke anxiety in me. So, looking at those spots with this lens, very vicarious feeling. and it forces you to have to make a decision. Are you going to go backward? Because at this point, when you get to this spot, you are aware that it is going backward, or am I going to risk this and step forward and trust that what is meant for me will be there?
Well, the answer is always risk it, in my opinion.
It is.
Because it's the only way to get to progress, And again, we're going up to an hour. We can probably do another hour or two on this one, but maybe we'll save. If you don't take that chance, you never get to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't take that chance, you don't get there. So just that example alone is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And just because someone else in your community never experienced that doesn't mean you shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And
No, at this point. Oh, sorry.
No, it's no, go ahead. But it's I totally understand what you're saying because I felt that way. And I'll just say this is that I'm glad I took every risk I ever taken in my life. Especially the ones I've explained earlier in the last, year. Because that's the true life,
Yeah.
That's the realest you can never be.
Well,
is to take risks and to be vulnerable, because the easy way out is not to be vulnerable and to accept what you're given
to go backward.
Go backward, or even even if you just went one step, even if you did experience the beach but then still went backwards, it's still great, but it's not how much more there is. So keep going.
I'll be completely honest. I can't go backward at this point because there is nowhere for this person to go back there.
Yeah, that's the best
This person
answer.
doesn't fit there.
Well, I see. This is why we got to do these. I always say this when we get into this. After it reaches a certain point, that I can go on more because it brings up so many things. Like when I went on my journey, I always thought I would miss that person. I never missed that person. I never missed him. I never, not one day. I thought I would, and the reason why I didn't miss him is because that wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
That was somebody else. I am more genuine and authentic right now than I've ever been in my life. since probably a child. Maybe in grammar school I was probably pretty genuine. And then we have all the distractions and everything that happens in your life, and high school and college, and then you realize, okay, now I got to go back.
And then
So then
those
when you,
identities shoved upon you as you grow,
yeah, you should do this or you
It's
should do that or so and so, and the answer to all that is no.
Mhm.
It's okay to say no to those things, and yes to something that you dreamed about or that you want. And that's where I came up with the that I'm going to do what I want. And it's very powerful, and it can piss people off too, because they you could do it. Yeah, because if I don't do what I want, what kind of life am I living? If it's a failure, let me find that out. I don't need you to tell me that. I don't need someone else to tell me that's not going to work. Let me find out for myself.
and it
You
the
know,
yeah. Yes.
and
And
show me. I don't know who said this one either, but this was one of them. I remember this one. Show me a satisfied man, and I'll show you a failure. Because never wanted to have a journey, never wanted to invent something else or
Mhm.
themselves. Just satisfied to whatever it is society tells them to do. So wow.
No, yeah, well, I mentioned earlier, and I think it's okay sometimes for us to run over an hour. Um, but I mentioned earlier that there may be people as I move forward who feel like they don't know me anymore. They never did.
Well, that's
Because
right.
what you were saying, I I feel like I'm more myself now, unapologetically, unashamed, and ready to go than I ever have been ever at any other point in time in my life. And I while we may have to accept that some parts of that old life is going to fall away, the people who are ready to be present with me will get a fuller version of what I actually am. And those situations will serve for this time. It's not about, I mentioned, and this is something I think that a lot of people deal with, is the fear of abandonment and rejection. And it's not so much about that anymore. Like, it's more about, I trust the process. Yoga has shown me that. People crap all over what Patabi Joyce said, practice and all is coming. I don't necessarily think he meant you'll be able to do every posture perfectly. I think he meant that very literally. Practice and all is coming.
Yeah,
Trust the process. Whatever that has to look like for you, trust the process. So, yes, I'm stepping forward. I'm going to be unapologetically and fully alive. And I'm ready to see what's out there for me as it starts showing up over the next bit, and has been showing up. It's a magical, amazing, life altering thing.
for sure.
And practice saves our life.
It
You
did.
know, in very concrete ways and these very etherical ways as well.
And I also will. I mean, I'll say this, and I guess we're getting close to the end, but it will continue to do that
Yes.
because I've had numerous experiences that it has which I talked about, including an unexpected one. When I came to a realization actually during this podcast about why it was, I actually looked for it. I went, and that was the medicine.
That was the
That
medicine.
was the pill. That was what I needed at the time. I didn't realize it until I actually started talking about it. And I will do that again, and until it fails me, which I doubt it. And
Mm-hmm.
um, thank you for sharing your story, and it's inspiring.
Thank you for sharing yours. We've been talking about another topic, and this kind of what you just said is a great introduction to that topic is one of the things that I believe is that there's no such thing as a yoga master. That's
Right.
not, there's no such thing as that. And what you just said is the reason that it's going to always to continue to show us to ourselves, show us, unless you're some kind of transcended, enlightened master and you've left your body, you know,
Right.
and you're not here, as long as you're a human being, I don't think you're mastering yoga
No.
um, for that reason. That's what the practice is. That's why it's not, there's no end. It's just practice.
Right.
Because there's all of these layers to peel. And so
I,
we'll talk about that probably more in another podcast too. There's so many things.
we have a lot of ideas coming up, and we're going to try to get them all recorded and out there. We're working hard on it. And
Yeah.
again, we do it to try to, I guess, heal ourselves and also explore ourselves and help others. I mean, that's really why we're doing it. And hopefully we'll get some more comments and more ideas. And Kelly, you want to say where to get some of our information or?
Sure. So you can find us both on Instagram, and I'll put the tags in the comment section here
Okay.
for you to find us there. And I'll be posting a registration opportunity for the retreat coming up September the 25th through the 28th, and I'll more details about that soon. I should be able to have the information regarding that when we post in our next episode 6, somewhere probably in the comment section of that. And I'll share that. But always feel free to comment here, comment on Spotify. So right now we're on YouTube and Spotify, the Goatless Yoga Podcast, and this
Perfect.
is episode 5. And for those of you who have reached out and commented and liked and recommended us to other people, thank you. We've not advertised this podcast at all. So we appreciate you all for being here and interacting always. So thank you. And again, Shawn, thank you so much for sharing your story today. It means a lot to me to get to hold space for that story, but
Thank you.
also that
Thank you
it
for holding the space. I
shared.
appreciate it. Thank you for holding space for me. I appreciate that. And something I wanted to get out for a little while. So I'm glad I was able to do that finally.
Well, we'll see you
Until
all
next
for
time.
episode 6.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.